Hello everyone, and welcome to this assembly and painting video for Kingdom Death Monsters, the Kingsman. This is the second Nemesis monster from the core game, and while I have had this air after the Phoenix, you can actually fight this monster before the Phoenix, but are forced to fight it after the Phoenix is available. So, the assembly of this one was very simple. As you can see, the legs just went right on. The hand here, I've heard some issues with that disappearing, like people getting that confused, but also I hear that a lot more with, honestly, the hand's hand. As you can see, I have a bit of trouble needing to get it on just right, because, yeah, as much as it looks easier to do before putting the sword, it would be much harder to put the sword in correctly afterwards. Then, getting this little nub of a thing for the crown. I don't even know why this isn't one solid piece. Honestly, I would have preferred it as such. Not counting the feather. I mean the crown and the lower part of the head. The feather went in pretty decently. Otherwise, the majority of the model went together very well. Making sure this was aligned properly so that it wasn't uneven on the base, the bottom of the pole arm that is, was a bit annoying, but not too hard. It took only the first try. So here's the usual I Heart Poots base, yada yada yada, same old, same old. And as you can see, the assembly for the model is, as I was saying, quick and simple. Now, painting this model, that was a little bit of a different story, as I have trouble keeping it on the base there. And there is the model fully assembled. So, painting this model, I had a bit of trouble figuring out what to paint what. I had to make I had to check references to the original colored artwork, the armor pieces that you can get off this guy, and then the various artwork that is within his cards, one of which is the original artwork, but only from around the waist up. Regardless, majority of this model, I start with this mid-range metallic, which ends up being used for the parts that I want to look brighter on the metal, which ends up being less than I actually end up painting. See, the reason I had to do a lot of references was I didn't realize where all the gold would end up on the model, so I had a lot of times of just painting things as is. There's a reason I refer to this first base coat as a slop base coat all the time, because at the end of the day, I'm really just trying to get paint on and trying to be productive. If you're not applying paint to the brush or glue to the model or something, nothing's getting done. So getting something done and then having a second opinion on it later is a little better, as long as you don't have to strip the model entirely. But for the most part, this is almost all the metal in the game in terms of the baseline metallics. There's some gold on the model as well, but that ends up in where I'm painting a lot, except for some of it on the cloth and obviously the crown. The glaive itself, polearm, glaive, whatever you want to call it, only the blade and the accoutrements around it and the spike on top are painted this color. The rest are later painted my darker metal, which honestly it just looked darker on every single image I could find for that section, which is why I went with it. And I'm kind of just sloppily painting the little lantern globe, because this is the lantern halberd. That's what it is, a halberd, not a glaive. And I'll get the yellow painted in later. But that's a majority of the armor there. Finding all the little bits did get a little annoying. I think I missed a couple things and painted some places I shouldn't have. So here's the red, which is probably the second biggest color on here. I use a darker red, but not my darkest red, I believe, so that I can get more highlights into it later. Oop, and here I am out of frame. Sorry, this is still back when I was still having trouble getting frame rate, but for the most part, I've got that down nowadays. Regardless, so this ends up being majority of the cloth on him and even some of the feathers. It's the exterior of his cloak and the entire cloth for his waist piece. Now, you saw me paint there on the back a bit, so anytime that I have like excess amount of paint, I'm not a big fan of watering paints down, because I think it just has the tendency to waste paint. Whatever you water down has the tendency to dry up, and also I think it's just better to apply it better. So In this case, I'm just starting the back. Now, I've sped it up a bit here for the rest of the back because it's just one big giant red piece. So it was either that or sit here a lot longer. I do like the way this came out at the end, but it took a little bit of work to get the shading right later, which you'll see. There was a lot of points in this model in which the ink would just pull up in places on the cloak and a couple other places as well. This model actually looked atrocious in my opinion before the ink got applied. So here's the end tail of the feathers. From what I could tell, only the very tips of the feathers should be red. It's not like with the hand where he was clearly made up of different things of the core game monsters, which I'll get into more for his video. And there's just a nice smooth application of paint. Sometimes it goes on sloppily, sometimes it goes on real nice. This is actually the only bit of brown that I end up using for the model, which is just the scabbard itself. And I believe I can't even remember what I use for the strap that's attaching it. I might have used a black or something. And then some red that I missed on the inside, being part of the waistcloth. And then onto the very light gray that I use when I want a section of a model to end up looking white. Again, I always recommend that one start with a color darker than what they want it to end up, or even more so, depending on how dark you want the model look, a color brighter than you want it to end up if you do a full black ink wash like I do on the majority of my models. So this is also a little sped up extra because at the end of the day, it just ended up being way too much of it sitting here. It's a lot of details. It's the filigree on, I think that's the right word, the trimming on the cloak and everything, but also the feathers and the interior of the cloak. It was just everywhere. It is easily the third most used color on this model, and it was very easy to dry brush the white on afterwards, but getting it all right was a little annoying. Now, I purposely leave some bleed in of the red, like I didn't make it nice and clean, because there's no way that it's just should look like it's purposely painted to look nice and clean. And as I said earlier, here is the pole of the halberd being painted in the darker metal. I believe this in the hilt / pommel of the sword is the only parts that I paint in this color. This is generally the metallic I use when I want it to look like it's like steel that's not made to look pretty. Like it's just steel for the sake of steel, or iron, although iron I believe is darker than steel, but for the carbon treatment that is, because that's what steel is compared to iron. But yeah, so nice, quick, simple application of it, and a lot of little small parts, making sure I get it right there. And then we move on to the gold. Now, this is the other reason that I don't like watering down paint. So my brass, which I use for a base coat of gold, and the gold itself, as well as some of my metals in general, are already very watered down to begin with. Like, they just came that way. And it is a pain to get them to apply on a first, second, or third coat unless I'm just completely glopping it on. And honestly, I don't like having to repeat things, but that's my personal opinion. I know some people love to just reapply coat after coat after coat using a watered down method, and it's less likely to lose details of the model, but honestly, I think you just need to be more careful. Personal opinion and method of doing stuff. As you can see, I'm painting over a lot of the stuff that was already painted the more mid-range metallic or silver, because I didn't know what I was painting what to begin with. I just was applying paint. So it ends up being a lot more of the model than I had originally anticipated. But at the end of the day, it ends up looking a lot better. Those details and pieces have the tendency to stand out more rather than just be flush within the armor. But as you can see, similar to how the Butcher looked like Play-Doh in my opinion when I was done painting the base coat, the Kingsman kind of looks flat. He looks like a piece of metal or a dull sports trophy for the most part. So the inking pulled out a lot of details in this, and it was really needed. Man, I still remember the days before I learned about how inking worked, and once I started learning about it, my models ended up crap, honestly, because I didn't understand it. It wasn't described correctly to me. And then I figured it out one day of just doing it anyway, and that's when my models just got tremendously better. Oh god, getting the parts that are painted gold on the gloves here was a pain, an absolute pain. Figuring out what part was which, whether it's the small hand image that's on the back of the gauntlets, or be it the majority part of the gauntlets as in reverse to that. So, and then here we go with the yellow, which I kind of use a crude method of getting into lesser bits, like into wells without watering down, of just, and this is where I am wasting paint, of course, of just painting it, wiping it off so that it's only in the recesses, and doing so carefully. I also do this a lot when I'm dry brushing, but that's more I've dry brushed too thick, and I need to wipe it off before it dries, because that's a common thing with dry brushing. You end up with it not, well, dry brushed enough that it's just too thick. And here we are onto the ink coat. So, this ends up kind of messy to begin with. There's a lot of points in this, like I said, that I have some trouble with welling. You can see a bubble right there, which is just, ugh. Or is that a bubble? No, that's actually the little pin. Sorry. Bubbling and welling are the two major issues that I have with, that I have with the results of using ink. So welling and so both of these are easy to fix. You just go back over it with the brush, you collect the excess with the brush itself, or and you honestly pop the bubbles and make sure that they didn't leave a ring behind, as in they dried up at all. And that's fine and everything. But if you don't catch those, it can just be obscene. Like, I'm purposely going for some welling on the cloak here to make it so that the folds are more dynamic and thus stand out more. But, like, majority of the armor, I just want the recesses filled to a standard level so that you can actually see the individual plates on the model and everything. Otherwise, it looks very flat, like it's a participation trophy or something with red on it. But the cloak is primarily where the pain in the ass with this model came with. A lot of it was just wash it over and be done. Because a lot of that was just very finely made and everything. As a note, for those of you that didn't know, this recent Gen Con 2018, Poots had a commissioned life-size Kingsman statue. Now, reminder, all the monsters, not for the sake of, like, World of Warcraft enemies, are bigger. As in, I'm comparing it to World of Warcraft because they're bigger so they can be seen easier, or the main characters are, and stuff like that. No, these guys are actually bigger, like, at least 50% taller. So, when I say life-size, it was a taller than an average person statue. He has an interview or two on other channels that are him standing next to, with the interviewer right next to the statue. It was just like, oh god. Apparently it came in 3 pieces. In one of the interviews, he talks about it in tremendous detail, and it was really interesting. But, so, as I was saying, here's a lot more inking. The feathers look tremendously better. They came out much better than the feathers did, in my opinion, than the Phoenix's feathers. Those were a bit of a pain to get right. And I'm still in the opinion that that model looks really dirty at the end of the day, not very uniformed and stuff like that. But I'm still okay with it. So here's me purposely filling up these recesses with extra ink. Although that bit that you see me cleaning up right there was a little bit too much. Because again, I want those to stand out. I want it to not be flat looking at all, which is the main point of inking and highlighting from what I've seen. You're either trying to get lighting properly, or you're trying to make things stand out. And here we are onto the base coat. The highlight dry brush coat, starting with the mid-grade metal onto the darker metal, and then moving on to the brighter metal onto the mid-range metal. And I usually start with something, like in this case, I started with the mid-range metal onto the darker metal, because if I screw that up, a lot of places were already that color to begin with, so you really can't mess it up too much. But I had to be a little bit more careful here, and I like after something that already exists is being used, I move on to what there is the majority of. So because at the end of the day, dry brushing you can kind of just redo over it, just like paints in general, but some of them will stand out through it. Like it's really hard to, if you screw up dry brushing something that's still kind of dark, like a blue, onto something that's supposed to be dry brushed white. Now, this isn't an issue with this model. The red is the darkest color, and it's in very distinct places. Although I do something different, I'll get to it when I do, that I don't do a lot with highlighting models. But for now, as you can see, again, going with the trimming for the cloak and the interior of it, I'm actually using white here, not a gray of some sort. The feathers, again, they come out much better. Like, inking plus highlighting is what, in my opinion, makes models look tremendously better. I haven't experimented too much with other than black inks, but I need to, start doing that eventually. And here's what I was talking about with highlighting, where I'm actually specifically doing fine, directly applied highlights. And this is very good for wanting lines, be they straight or not, to stand out very much so. So you get like a fine tip brush and then just literally, as you can see, apply the side of the brush, or where the paint is, to the model. And here I am brushing stuff off again because it was too thick. Now, again, as I've said in past videos, my red has had a bit of trouble showing up. I have since then replaced the red paint that I have. Same-ish color, but less goopy than the pot that I had. It shows up in person, but on camera, yeah, you're barely gonna even notice the difference. So, sorry about that. Because camera lighting still kind of blurs a bit of the color and everything. So using a tan color here to finish up the brown itself, like I do on a lot of my things that I want to look like leather, and then using a yellow again, like it's literally the same yellow for the lighting. I'm not only doing the light itself of the lantern, I'm also trying to do the side of the face. So the model looks like it's partially illuminated by the lantern and by the same color in the process, which pretty much ends the model here. And that's it. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I hope this was helpful. If you did, or if it was, feel free to press the like button. If you think somebody else will enjoy this, please share this video. If you didn't like this video, go ahead and press the dislike button. I won't mind, but please leave a constructive comment as to why. And if you want to comment in general, feel free to, such as specific models you'd like to see paint or talk about techniques and stuff. Or, as some people have, and I really appreciate, tell me that you enjoyed the model or it's been inspiring you or helped you. And if you want to see more like this, be it more miniature painting videos, my board game unboxing videos, or my board game overview videos, feel free to subscribe. Regardless, thank you for watching and have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.